David R. here. Today I'm going to talk to you about this book, When Broken Glass Floats by CHANRITHY HIM. I hope I'm not mispronouncing her name. I probably am, but I don't speak Cambodian, so I'm just pronouncing it the way that I see it in English. And there's going to be other words too that I probably mispronounce, so I just thought I'd tell you that ahead of time. This book is about CHANRITHY's experience under the dictatorship or rule of Pol Pot and his Khmer Rouge regime. This book has a lot of detail in it about the cruelty that these people underwent during this short window of time that the regime held power in Cambodia. I have a lot of notes, but even though I am going to cover a lot, I can't cover everything in the book. I do believe that this book here is well worth your time to read. She has interviews on the internet as well. You could look at those, but this is a really insightful, detailed book that will key you in as to what life is like under a communist regime. All right, the Khmer Rouge was an authoritarian regime that controlled the country of Cambodia under Pol Pot from 1975 to 1979. The group was totalitarian, regressive, xenophobic, and paranoid. When the Khmer Rouge finally took power, they turned the calendar to year zero. This meant that all culture and traditions were to be abolished so that a new revolutionary culture could take its place. They destroyed religious statues and shrines. Women and girls had to cut their hair, and education was banned. Pol Pot and his Marxist regime ordered the murder of over 2 million Cambodians. The mass graves he ordered his people to dig were known as the killing fields. On April 17th, 1975, when CHANRITHY was only 9 years old, a voice came over the radio, and it said this: Phnom Penh has been taken over. If you don't give up your weapons and display the white flag, our comrades will consider this an act of rebellion against us. Notice, they said, give up your weapons. That is key to any communist regime. They need to take the guns. That's what's happening in the USA. Every time a new gun law is passed, it's getting closer and closer to something like this. Well, after this announcement over the radio, that's when the horror began. Families gave up their weapons and were forced out of their homes in the city and had to move to the country. Though the Khmer Rouge promised equality, which they tried to achieve because they had the women cut their hair short to look like men and to work like men. Though they promised all of this equality, these things that they thought were good, they restricted freedoms and told people that they couldn't travel outside the confines of their rural neighborhood. CHANRITHY's uncles and father were executed in the killing fields. Now, the families were told that these men were going to orientation, but that wasn't so. Because right after the men were taken off of the ox carts, they were assigned to dig their own graves. And after they were done, they were executed with a hoe to the back of the head. What was their crime? Well, for being men. Being somebody who might pose a threat to the regime. They were killed. Women and children were expected to be slave laborers. The rice fields were filthy, muddy, hot from the extreme heat They had no shade out there where they were working. And there was an extreme amount of loneliness among the people because they were separated from their families. They were working side by side with people they didn't know. The Khmer Rouge not only controlled the day-to-day behavior of the people, but they also controlled what people said and what words could and could not be spoken. Such as people had to address each other as comrade. And they couldn't speak any other language. There was just supposed to be their language only, like if somebody were speaking French or English. That could be the grounds for an execution. Certain words were banned from the language, and this is how it went. Now in the USA, certain words are banned from our language, and certain words can be spoken, certain words can't. At different times, it depends on the person you're talking about. Yeah, we're there right now. In order to dismantle the family unit, these people were rounded up into different freight cars so that they were among strangers. These freight cars, these rides, were filthy, and people had to use a bathroom where they stood. They were on these cars for many hours. It reminds me of the trains leading to the concentration camps. But when these people got off of the trains, they were told that their new home was among some trees. CHANRITHY said, "Trees are my walls, the sky my roof." Eventually they were given bamboo and leaves to make a hut. But these are very poor living conditions. The slave camp villages consisted of two types of people. There were the new people and the old people. The new people were those who just arrived from the city, and the old people were those who had already been there, who were residents of this area. Now, the old people, they took everybody's jewelry, and the people were told that they had to rid themselves from American imperialists. So in other words, they had to give up everything to these people who obviously sold them and used them for whatever they could gain. But you see the hypocrisy of this. These people were told to give up their jewelry, give them to somebody else, and then that person uses this American imperialist jewelry to better themselves. The slaves had to drink the water that they cleaned their clothes in and their pots and pans in. This obviously was filthy. These extremely bad conditions caused diarrhea, fever, infections, and edema. Yet, when people went to the hospital, they basically went there to die. The hospitals were primitive. They had dirt floors. People competed with mice for food. CHANRITHY said this, "In a strange cycle, the rodents come to gnaw on the weak and dead. The dying wait to trap those who feed upon them." People ate whatever they could to survive, especially when food rations were low or non-existent. CHANRITHY ate toads, bugs, rats, mice, tadpoles, whatever she could get her hands on, she would eat. It wasn't only the starvation and lack of freedom, but the brutal guards. The guards would be physically brutal or even mentally brutal, like threatening somebody and then not going through with it, but making that person go through this mental anguish until they gave up and thought that they were going to die, and then they were set free. And that's what happened to CHANRITHY in this situation here. She injured herself on a tree branch, and it hurt her foot, and it was getting infected. It was causing her to not be able to sleep at night. So she moved across on her hands and knees to an area where there was this leaf, I think it was, or a plant called Slark Harnig, and she went over to get that, but she was caught by a guard. She said to the guard, "I'm not stealing. I'm picking Slark Harnig for a swollen foot. If you don't believe me, just look at my infected wound. I don't lie. I need Slark Harnig. My foot hurts at night. Please spare my life. Don't kill me. So he tied her to a tree and said he would be back to kill her at sunset so that everybody could see this when they were leaving work. But when the time came, he set her free and told her not to steal anymore. You see, it was a mind game that he played with her. Watching family and friends die was just as bad as starvation, and a lot of people die in this book. One day, she went to a doorless barn to visit her mother, and she didn't even recognize her mother at first because she looked so different, from being starved and all the brutality she had to face. She said, "I see a frail woman sitting on a bare, rusty bed. Her forehead rests on her knee, her face is pale, and her swollen eyes closed. I'm trapped by what I see, a nightmare." And her mother eventually died of dysentery. But she wasn't completely dead yet when the guards threw her into a hole with a bunch of other dead people. So her mom was still conscious, and she was in a hole with who knows how many dead people. That is a nightmare. That is scary. What do you think of that? Wow. So eventually, the Khmer Rouge was toppled, and things started to get back to normal. And it took a while for CHANRITHY to learn English and then move to the USA. And I don't know what she's doing now. I don't even know if she's still alive. But her life dramatically improved once the communism was eradicated. I'm going to end this video with a poem that CHANRITHY wrote called "Please Give Us Voice." When broken glass floats, a nation drowns, descending to the abyss. From mass graves in the once gentle land, their blood seeps into Mother Earth. Their suffering spirits whisper to her, "Why has this happened?" Their voice resounds in the spirit world, shouts through the souls of survivors, determined to connect, begging the world, "Please remember us. Please speak for us. Please bring us justice."